Welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is JP and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up in your feed more often. 3 centuries of peace had made them forget the humanists' true potential. Imi's claws clicked against the liquid metal floor as he paced, watching the subtle ripples spread outward with each step. The council chamber's walls flowed like quicksilver, reflecting the gathered species' emotional states in their ever-shifting patterns. Today they rippled with anticipation, with ambition, with the kind of blind confidence that came before catastrophic falls. Imi's short snout twitched as he caught the scent of chlorophyll. Evor had arrived. The Viridian council member's emerald skin shone under the chamber's ambient light, his antennae swaying with excitement as he strode toward his speaking platform. Imi's fur bristled. In all his cycles as senior military strategist, he'd never seen such eagerness to court disaster from this Viridian. The chamber itself seemed to vibrate with the gathering's energy. Massive platforms drifted like leaves on a pond, carrying representatives from dozens of worlds. Above them, the grand display screen morphed into existence, a canvas of liquid metal stretching across the vault of the chamber. The walls continued their dance, now forming elegant vines that reached toward the ceiling, a reflection of the council's pride, their certainty in their own supremacy. Imi's own platform rose higher, positioning him among the senior advisory ring. His keen eyes tracked the movements below, noting how the junior representatives clustered around Ever's position. The young Viridian had gathered quite a following in recent cycles, his rhetoric of council supremacy finding eager audiences among those who'd never seen real war. The display screen rippled, manifesting statistics and projections, humanity's colonial expansion rates, resource consumption, military expenditure. All carefully curated to support Ever's proposal, no doubt. Imi's muscles tensed as he watched the data streams flow across the liquid metal surface, knowing what was coming. Esteemed colleagues, Ever's voice carried through the chamber's acoustic channels, the walls reshaping themselves to amplify his words while dampening the murmurs of dissent Imi could hear from the veteran representatives. For too long, we have allowed an unstable element to maintain equal status within our enlightened council. The platform beneath Evor rose slightly, liquid metal flowing up to create a subtle pedestal. Imi noticed how the junior councilor's antennae straightened. He was enjoying this. Humanity's continued possession of colonial rights and council membership presents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Their history of internal warfare, their resistance to proper oversight, their insistence on maintaining independent military capabilities. These are not the marks of a species ready for equal partnership in our civilization. Imi stepped forward, his fur rippling with tension. Point of historical context, Counselor. The walls shifted, creating a channel for his voice to cut through the chamber. I served during humanity's ascension period. Their military capabilities were deemed sufficient to warrant— With respect, senior strategist, Ever interrupted, his antennae twitching in concealed disdain. We're all familiar with the historical records. Tales of human warfare have grown quite elaborate in the telling, I think you'll agree. 3 centuries of peace have demonstrated their ability to be civilized. Surely this proves those old accounts were exaggerated for diplomatic purposes. The liquid metal walls pulsed with amusement. Too many of the gathered representatives were nodding, buying into this dangerous dismissal. Imi's claws extended involuntarily, scraping against his platform. Those tales are documented fact, Counselor. I witnessed their capabilities firsthand. The peace you speak of was carefully negotiated, predicated on mutual respect and recognition of sovereignty. And how many cycles have you served, senior strategist? Ever's voice carried a note of false concern. Perhaps your memory of those events have been colored by the enthusiasm of youth? Laughter rippled through the chamber, the walls catching and amplifying it. Imi watched the liquid metal architecture reshape itself, forming subtle but unmistakable patterns of dismissal around his platform. The council was already decided, he realized. They wanted to believe in their own superiority so badly they would ignore every warning sign, every lesson of history. I move to begin the voting process, Ivor announced, his antennae now fully erect with triumph. The proposal to strip humanity of their council membership and colonial rights, bringing them under direct council administration for their own protection and the greater good of galactic civilization. The display screen shifted, preparing to record the votes. Imi stood rigid, watching the liquid metal walls continue their morphing, reflecting the council's pride, their certainty, their forgetting. They had forgotten the fury of humanity unleashed. They had forgotten why peace was negotiated, not imposed. They would remember soon enough. 2 cycles have passed since Ever's proposal. The liquid metal walls of the council chamber vibrated with a new tone now, their patterns shifting from diplomatic curves to angular fortifications. Imi's claws pressed against his platform as he studied the massive display screen, watching another human colony empty itself with impressive coordination. Each step he took sent ripples through the reactive floor, the metal responding to his growing unease with subtle patterns of warning that spread outward like waves in a dark pool. The silence was what haunted him most. Humanity hasn't tried to reverse the voting. No protests, no resistance, just the dreadful efficiency of a species that had done this before. The corridors where human diplomats had once walked now echoed with emptiness, their absence more threatening than any display of force. Each evacuation report showed the same pattern: orderly withdrawals, civilian ships escorted by military vessels moving in formations that made his combat instincts bristle. The orderly retreat spoke of extensive planning, of protocols long established and regularly rehearsed. The chamber's walls had begun to mirror the changing political landscape. Where once they had flowed with gentle undulations, now they formed sharp edges and dominant spires. The liquid metal architecture responded to the collective consciousness of the council, and lately that consciousness had grown increasingly rigid, increasingly certain of its own supremacy. You see, Ever's voice carried across the chamber as he approached Imi's platform, his antennae swaying with satisfaction. The young Viridian's green skin had taken on a deeper hue, flush with what he perceived as victory. They understand their place now. The old stories of their military prowess were clearly exaggerated. A truly dangerous species would not surrender their territories so easily. Imi's fur rippled with tension, but he kept his voice steady. Years of military service had taught him the value of controlled responses. Have you ever hunted, Counselor Evor? The question made Evor's antennae twitch in confusion. There's a moment when tracking large prey. They stop running, stop showing fear. That's not when you've won. That's when they've chosen their ground for the fight. The display screen shifted, drawing their attention. New data streamed across its liquid surface, long-range scans showing human ships moving in precise formations. Military vessels escorted civilian transports, but Imi's experienced eye caught something else: subtle patterns in their movements, the way they maintained exact distances, the positioning that spoke of carefully coordinated battle groups waiting for deployment orders. They're not just retreating, he muttered, his claws extending unconsciously as he studied the movements. The platform beneath him resonated with his tension, the liquid metal surface creating small eddies of concern. They're deploying. The chamber's architecture responded to his unease, liquid metal flowing into subtle defensive patterns. Even the walls seemed to sense what was coming, even if their masters remained blind. The vines that had formed in triumph now took on a more protective aspect, unconsciously preparing for what was to come. Imi stepped closer to the display, his keen eyes tracking the patterns of human ship movements. "Submit report," he commanded, and the liquid metal screen glowed, accepting his military override. The display rippled like mercury as it processed his credentials. Multiple anomalies detected in evacuation patterns, human military vessels maintaining precision grid formation during civilian withdrawal, consistent with preparation for rapid response deployment. Historical analysis suggests— "Historical analysis is irrelevant," Evur interrupted, his antennae rigid with irritation. The walls around him briefly formed sharp, dismissive angles. "The Council has spoken. The humans are accepting their new status with appropriate humility. Your obsession with ancient conflicts is clouding your judgment, senior strategist." The display screen suddenly shifted, new data flowing across its surface. Imi's breath caught as he recognized the signatures. Human ships appearing at the edges of Council space, moving deeper into their territory. Not attacking, not yet, but— The chamber's lighting dimmed slightly as if responding to the growing shadow of threat. "They're taking positions," he whispered, watching the real-time updates. His fur stood on end as the pattern became clear. "All those civilian evacuations, they were clearing their people out of the line of fire. They're not retreating from our strength, they're removing potential hostages." The chamber's walls shuddered, liquid metal flowing into increasingly defensive patterns as more data poured in. Human ships appearing in system after system, their formations perfect, their movements synchronized with a precision that spoke of long preparation. They had anticipated this, Imi realized. They had prepared for the Council's hubris. "Nonsense!" Evor declared. But Imi could smell the first hints of fear scent from the Viridian. His antennae had lost their proud arch, now twitching with the first stirrings of doubt. "They wouldn't dare! They cannot possibly believe they could stand against the combined might of the Council!" Imi turned to face the younger counselor, his fur fully bristled now. The platform beneath them rippled with tension, responding to the growing emotional charge of their confrontation. "They are not afraid to stand against our combined might," he growled. "You've given them exactly what they needed. Justification. The Council's unanimous vote to strip their rights, to force them under our control. We've proved every warning their war historians ever gave about the dangers of central authority." The display screen flashed again, and this time even Evur fell silent. The humans had cut all communication channels simultaneously across every system. No demands, just silence. The chamber's ambient light dimmed further, casting long shadows from the increasingly fortress-like formations of the walls. That terrible, haunting silence. The Council had forgotten humanity's power. They were about to be reminded. The first strike came while Evor was still forming his next denial. The massive display screen erupted in a cascade of alerts, its liquid metal surface rippling with emergency protocols. Imi watched in professional admiration as dozens of Council defense stations died simultaneously, their destruction synchronized across light years of space. No declaration of war, just the raw fury of a species that had mastered the art of conflict, while the rest of the galaxy spoke of peace. Impossible, eternal peace. The Council chamber's architecture writhed in response to the collective shock, liquid metal walls twisting into chaotic patterns that reflected the pandemonium below. Representatives from 1,000 worlds cried out in their native tongues as reports flooded in, each platform becoming an island of panic in a sea of fear. "Impossible," Evor whispered, his antennae pressed flat against his head. "Our defensive grid was impenetrable. The calculations, the simulations, were based on what we thought we knew," Imi finished, his fur rippling as he analyzed the tactical data streaming across the display. The humans hadn't just breached the Council's defenses, they had bypassed them entirely, using principles of warfare that the Council's military theorists had long forgotten. The chamber's walls continued their frantic metamorphosis, liquid metal flowing into increasingly defensive configurations, as if trying to protect its occupants from the harsh reality of their miscalculation. Vines became buttresses, archways transformed into barriers, and still the reports of destruction of other places poured in. "Senior strategist," a voice called from below. One of the military liaison platforms had risen to his level, carrying a young Ermani officer whose fur bore the distinctive patterns of the Scout Corps. "First wave analysis complete. The humans, they're not using any weapons we can identify. Our defensive screens register no energy signatures, no projectiles, no recognizable forms of attack. The stations just stop existing." Amy's claws extended involuntarily as he processed this information. Of course, the Council had spent 3 centuries studying human military technology, preparing defenses against what they thought they understood. But humans had never stopped advancing, never truly revealed their core capabilities. They had shown the Council exactly what the Council expected to see, nothing more. The display screen shifted again, now showing the systematic dismantling of the Council's outer defense ring. Each station vanished with one single strike, creating gaps in coverage that human ships immediately occupied. The liquid metal surface of the screen seemed to shudder with each new loss, as if the very substance of the Council's power was being unmade. "We need to launch a counter-offensive," Ever declared, his voice carrying the brittle edge of desperate authority. "The combined fleets are exactly what they want." Imi cut him off, gesturing at the tactical display. "Look at their positioning. Every strike has been calibrated not just to destroy, but to provoke specific responses. They're hurting us, Counselor, drawing our forces into pre-selected killing zones." The chamber's ambient lighting flickered as another wave of reports flooded in. More council members were arriving now, their platforms jockeying for position as they sought answers, issued demands, pleaded for protection. The liquid metal architecture responded to their fear, creating unconscious patterns of flight and shelter that rippled through the walls like a visual representation of panic. 3 centuries, Emi murmured, watching the systematic destruction continue across the display. They gave us 3 centuries to prove we could be trusted with power, to show we had learned from history. And what did we do? We proved every one of their worst fears correct. A new alert caught his attention, movement at the edge of council space. The tactical display expanded, showing human fleet formations shifting with terrible purpose. Each group moved with perfect coordination, getting closer to their targets with each passing moment. "Those aren't normal ships," the Scout Corps officer whispered, her own fur bristling. "The energy readings, the way they move. What are we even looking at?" "Evolution," Imi answered grimly. "While we congratulated ourselves on eternal peace, they prepared for war. While we built prettier walls," he gestured at the liquid metal architecture surrounding them, "they built weapons that could tear reality apart." The display screen suddenly stabilized, its liquid metal surface going perfectly still. A single message appeared, transmitted simultaneously to every council world and station. Imi felt his throat tighten as he read the words, recognizing them in the echo of humanity's ancient military doctrines. "You've grown weak and incompetent. The Council forgot that we are not alone in the galaxy and tried to drag us down with them into their peaceful fantasy. It's time to learn that peace is not the same as helplessness." The chamber's walls shuddered once more, their liquid metal surface briefly reflecting the true scope of the disaster facing them. In that moment of clarity, Emi saw what he had feared all along. This wasn't just a military action. This was a lesson, carefully planned and precisely executed. The Council had forgotten humanity's power, forgotten why peace had been negotiated in the first place. The lesson was just beginning as the Council deployed its own combined fleet. Their fleet looked magnificent on the display screen, ships flowing together in the liquid metal formations that had dominated space warfare for millennia. Emi watched the tactical overlay with growing dread, noting how the human forces seemed to fragment before this show of overwhelming force, scattering like leaves before a storm. Behind him, the chamber's walls had begun to reshape with renewed confidence. The liquid metal architecture responded to the council members' surge of pride, creating elaborate murals and triumphant arches that stretched toward the ceiling. Their earlier fear had transformed into celebration as some reports of the human retreat filtered through the command channels. "You see," Ever's voice carried across the chamber, his antennae once again held high with restored confidence. "They never expected us to respond so quickly. All their tricks mean nothing against proper military doctrine." Emi's claws scraped against his platform as he studied the tactical display. Human ships were indeed retreating, but something about their movement patterns struck him as wrong. Their formations, even in retreat, maintained an orderly spacing. No signs of panic, no break in coordination. This wasn't the chaos of a scared enemy. This was something else entirely. "Magnify Sector 7, he commanded, and the liquid metal screen rippled as it focused on a particular group of human vessels. Analysis of enemy damage sustained. The data streamed across the display. Minimal casualties, negligible damage to their primary vessels. The humans were falling back in perfect order, yet the Council fleet pursued with increasing aggression, breaking their own formation in their eagerness to present their apparent advantage. "We need to pull back," Emi announced, his fur bristling as the pattern became clear. "This isn't a retreat. It's a—" The display screen erupted in a cascade of alerts. Human ships that had appeared to be fleeing suddenly pivoted in sudden maneuvering, their formations inverting to create interlocking fields of fire. The Council fleet, having abandoned their defensive formations in pursuit, found themselves caught in a massive three-dimensional crossfire. The chamber's walls shuddered as the first wave of destruction reports came in. Liquid metal architecture that had been celebrating victory moments before now twisted into shapes of horror as Council ships began dying by the hundreds. The humans had allowed themselves to be pushed back directly into their prepared killing zones, and the Council fleet had followed like prey into a trap. "No," Ever whispered, his antennae drooping as he watched the tactical display. "Our ships, they're just dissolving. What kind of weapons—" "The kind we convinced ourselves shouldn't be researched and built," Emi cut him off, watching as human weapons tore through Council shields as if they were mere illusions. The liquid metal screens could barely keep up with the pace of destruction, its surface rippling continuously as it tried to display the cascade of tactical data. Space itself seemed to bend around the human vessels as they executed their trap. Council ships that tried to retreat found their drive fields failing, their liquid metal hulls losing cohesion under the influence of forces their designers had never imagined possible. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a demonstration of such overwhelming technological superiority that it bordered on the incomprehensible. The chamber's architecture continued its frantic transformation, liquid metal flowing into increasingly desperate patterns as more council members arrived to witness their fleet's destruction. Platforms jostled for position as admirals and strategists shouted contradictory orders, each trying to salvage something from the disaster unfolding before them. "All ships, emergency withdrawal," Emi called out, his military override cutting through the chaos. "Break contact immediately. Maximum dispersal pattern." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The humans had positioned their forces perfectly, creating a web of overlapping fields of fire that made escape hard. The display screen shifted again, showing the final phase of the human trap closing. Their ships moved at once, their formations creating patterns that seemed to mock the Council's liquid metal aesthetics with their rigid, unchanging nature. Where Council technology flowed and adapted, human weapons simply erased whatever they touched from existence. They let us think we were winning, Imi explained, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent chamber. They showed us exactly what we expected to see: weakness, retreat, vulnerability. And we, in our arrogance, never questioned why an enemy that had just demonstrated such overwhelming power would suddenly appear to flee from our response. The walls of the chamber had begun to drip, liquid metal architecture losing cohesion as if in sympathy with their dying fleet. The proud vines and triumphant arches of minutes ago had melted into formless puddles of fear and despair. Council members who had been celebrating victory now stood in stunned silence, watching their greatest military force vanish into nothingness. In the center of the display screen, a single human vessel moved forward. Unlike the Council's liquid metal ships with their flowing forms, this craft was all hard angles and final purpose. It began broadcasting on all frequencies, its message appearing in letters of cold fire across the liquid metal surface. Time for this council to cease to exist. The council chamber's display screen had become a catalog of precision destruction. Imi watched as humanity's forces systematically dismantled millennia of council authority, their attacks focused with surgical accuracy on military and governmental targets. The liquid metal walls writhed in sympathetic agony as each strategic installation across council space winked out of existence. What struck him most was the deliberate restraint. Human weapons carved through defensive stations and command centers with great precision, leaving civilian structures completely untouched. They could have leveled entire worlds, Imi realized, but instead chose to excise the Council's authority like a surgeon removing a tumor. "They're not even targeting our cities," he explained to Ever, whose antennae had coiled tightly against his head in shock. "It's as if they think they don't need to finish us for good, that we won't be a challenge to them." The display screen shifted to show Evur's homeworld. The Viridian's breath caught as he watched human ships systematically neutralize the planet's orbital defense ring. The massive liquid metal structures that had protected his world for centuries simply ceased to exist, their particles scattered to the solar wind. Yet the civilian habitats floating nearby remained untouched, despite being far more fragile targets. "How?" Evor whispered, his green skin pale with shock. "How can they be so precise? Our own weapons couldn't—" "Because they never invested their time building fancier walls," Imi cut him off, his fur rippling as he analyzed the tactical data. "We spent 3 centuries congratulating ourselves on maintaining peace. They spent it perfecting their already superior art of warfare." The chamber's architecture continued its desperate attempt to adapt, liquid metal flowing into increasingly complex defensive patterns. But with each new report of destruction, the walls seemed to lose more of their cohesion. Proud structures melted into formless liquid, elegant arches collapsed into puddles. The very substance of council power was literally dissolving around them as a reflection of the collective emotions. Through the massive screen, they watched humanity's inexorable advance. Council military installations, constructed from the most advanced liquid metal technology, proved no more substantial than morning mist before human weapons. Defense platforms that had stood guard for centuries vanished between heartbeats. Command centers, buried kilometers beneath planetary crusts, were excised with precision strikes, leaving the surrounding civilian infrastructures somehow intact. Planetary Defense Hub 7 reports complete neutralization, the tactical display announced in its emotionless voice. Military Command Center 12 neutralized. Orbital Enforcement Station 23 neutralized. The list continued. Each entry another piece of Council enforcing authority erased from existence. Imi's platform shuddered as more Council members crowded into the chamber, their panic adding to the architectural chaos around them. Representatives who had voted so confidently to strip humanity of their rights now watched helplessly as humanity stripped them of their power to enforce such decisions. They're not even boarding the installations, the young Scouts Corps officer observed, her fur standing on end. No ground troops, no occupation forces. They're just removing our ability to fight back, or to control anyone else. Emi nodded grimly. This isn't a conquest. It's about correction. He gestured at the display screen, where another orbital defense ring was being systematically disassembled. They might not want to rule us. It seems they want to ensure we can't ever threaten them, or anyone else, again. The chamber's walls shuddered as a new alert dominated the display. The Council's primary military academy, a massive complex of liquid metal architecture that had trained commanders for millennia, was simply gone. Not destroyed. There was no debris, no explosion. It had been removed from existence with a weapon that sucked every drop of liquid metal in a dark vortex. That was... Emi tried, watching the human targets vanishing from existence. Such a weapon scares me. Ever's antenna twitched spasmodically as another defensive installation vanished from his homeworld. Can nothing stop them? We had our chance, Emi responded, his voice heavy with the weight of historical perspective. 3 centuries to prove we could be trusted with power. 3 centuries to show we had learned from humanity's warnings about weakness of centralized authority. Instead, we proved them right. The display screen suddenly shifted again, showing a new wave of human ships arriving in perfect formation. Unlike the liquid metal vessels of the Council fleet, with flowing forms, these craft were angular. They moved like the physical embodiment of final forms, each position calculated to perfect a single task bordering the limit of specialization. The chamber's architecture, responding to the collective despair of its occupants, began to lose its last pretense of structure. Liquid metal walls that had once proudly displayed the Council's power now ran like tears down to pool on the floor, unable to maintain coherence in the face of such overwhelming technological superiority. A new message appeared on the display screen, its words burning with cold fire. Your military authority has been revoked. Now comes the core of your decision-making structure. The Council chamber's liquid metal architecture had completely lost cohesion by the time Emi grabbed Ever's arm and pulled him toward the emergency exits. What had once been the proud seat of galactic governance now resembled a melting ice sculpture, as if the building knew it would soon be under human attack. We need to move, Emi growled, his military training taking over as he guided the shell-shocked Viridian through corridors that were literally dissolving around them. The floor beneath their feet rippled with each step, the liquid metal struggling to maintain basic structural integrity. Evor stumbled along beside him, his antennae pressed flat against his head in primal fear. Where can we possibly go? You saw what they did to the defense stations, to the military bases, everything we built. Not everything, Emi corrected him, pausing at an intersection to check the emergency routing displays. The liquid metal screens flickered unstably, but he could still make out the evacuation paths. They're only targeting government and military installations. Civilian infrastructure remains intact. They're not here to eliminate us. They reached a viewport, and Emi felt his fur stand on end at the sight. The magnificent orbital rings that had encircled the Council capital for millennia were being systematically erased from existence. Not destroyed, there was no debris, no explosions. The massive liquid metal structures simply ceased to be, the few surviving particles scattered to the solar wind. Look there, Emi pointed, indicating a stream of vessels flowing through the remaining transit corridors. Civilian ships. They are being allowed to evacuate freely. The building shuddered around them, more of its liquid metal structure losing cohesion. Emergency containment fields sparkled as they activated, trying to maintain basic life support as the architecture literally melted away. Through gaps in the failing walls, they could see other Council structures suffering the same fate. Proud towers of liquid metal architecture dissolving like mirages in the morning sun. This way, Emi urged, pulling Ever toward one of the civilian docking rings. His keen eyes had spotted a merchant vessel preparing for departure, its captain obviously deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. "We need to get off this station before—" The world twisted around them. For a moment, space itself seemed to bend, reality warping like a reflection in troubled water. When it snapped back into focus, the entire Council Military Command Center, a structure that had stretched for kilometers and almost reached space, was simply gone. No explosion, no destruction, just absence. "By all the stars," Ivor whispered, his green skin pale with shock. "How can they do this? What kind of weapons—" "The kind we convinced ourselves couldn't exist," Imi responded grimly, hurrying them along the increasingly unstable corridor. They reached the docking ring just as another reality-bending wave passed through the station. More council structures vanished, leaving precisely carved gaps in the fabric of space. The merchant ship's captain was already cycling the airlock, obviously eager to depart before the humans' attention turned to their section of the station. "Wait!" Imi called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of military command. "2 more passengers!" The airlock cycled again, and they rushed aboard. Through the ship's viewports, they watched the systematic dismantling of their civilization continue. Council administrative centers, military installations, and government complexes vanished one by one, while civilian structures remained eerily untouched. The merchant ship's engines powered to life, and they began moving away from the disintegrating station. Imi watched the tactical displays, noting how human vessels maintained strict corridors for civilian traffic. They were allowing anyone to flee who wished to, while systematically removing the Council's ability to enforce its will. "We're receiving a broadcast," the ship's captain announced, her voice tight with stress. "All frequencies, all languages." The message scrolled across the ship's liquid metal displays, which flickered unstably in the presence of whatever forces the humans were employing. "Your authority was based on technological superiority you no longer possess. Your power was maintained through ignorance we have now corrected. Your time of unified rule is over. Individual species may govern themselves as they see fit, but no central authority will be permitted. This is not a negotiation. This is not a war. This is an adjustment of reality to reflect the new truth. You are no longer in control." Imi felt Evur tremble beside him as the implications sank in. 3 centuries of peace had made them forget humanity's true nature. 3 centuries of complacency had blinded them to their own arrogance. Now they watched, helpless, as humanity demonstrated just how far they had advanced, while the Council slept in its imagined superiority. The merchant ship accelerated away from the capital, joining streams of civilian vessels fleeing the systematic destruction of Council authority. Behind them, a precise removal, targeted to excise the cancer of the Council power, while ignoring the healthy tissue of civilian society. The merchant ship's liquid metal displays had finally stabilized enough to maintain coherent images, though they still rippled occasionally when human vessels passed nearby. Imi stood at the main viewport, watching the systematic dismantling of an era continue across the galaxy. Beside him, Evur had fallen into a sort of trance, his antennae moving listlessly as reports of Council dissolution filtered through the emergency channels. "Another sector declaring independence," the ship's captain announced, her voice tired but professional. "The Meridian Cluster has formally withdrawn from Council space. Their defensive installations are being removed as we speak." Imi's fur rippled as he studied the tactical feed. The humans were finishing their work with the same clinical efficiency with which they had begun it, the constructions being removed as they spoke. The ship shuddered slightly as another reality-warping wave passed through their sector. Through the viewport, they watched an ancient Council administrative complex simply cease to exist, Imi's heart beating furiously. "Final broadcast incoming," the captain announced. "Again, all channels, all languages." The message appeared across every functioning display, its words burning with quiet finality. "Our intervention is complete. Your ability to enforce authority has been removed. Each species may now govern themselves according to their own customs and laws, but no power will be permitted to rise above the others again. This is not negotiable. This is not temporary. This is the new reality. We will return to our space. Our borders will remain closed. Any attempt to reconstruct military power beyond local defense forces will be met with immediate adjustment. You forgot who we are. You forgot why we negotiated peace rather than accepting protection under your all-powerful umbrella. You have been reminded. Don't forget again. Imi watched the human fleet begin their withdrawal, their ships maintaining those perfect orderly formations, even in departure. "They're really leaving?" Evor whispered, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his shock. "Just like that? After demonstrating such power, such complete superiority, they're not going to take control themselves?" "That doesn't seem like their goal," Imi replied, understanding flowing through him like a cold stream. "They didn't want to rule. They didn't want revenge. They wanted to destroy the Council, and that was it. Look at what they've left us." He gestured at the tactical display, where the galaxy was reorganizing itself in real time. Species after species were declaring independence. Civilian trade routes remained open. Cultural exchanges continued, but the apparatus of centralized control was no more. 3 centuries, Imi mused, watching the human fleet retreat. We had 3 centuries to learn, yet we didn't. "What do we do now?" Evor asked, his antennae moving with uncertainty. "We remember," Imi answered, watching the last human ships disappear into their territory. The merchant ship's captain plotted a course for the nearest independent port, where refugees from the Council's dissolution were gathering to plan their futures. Through the viewport, Imi watched the stars wheel past, each one now marking a system free from the Council's control. The humans had forgotten nothing, but they had taught the galaxy how to remember.